Welcome back. I'm Walt Kane. We are in your corner. My guest this week says there were nearly 12,000 sexual harassment claims brought to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission last year. Although the total number of individuals filing sexual harassment claims has dropped over the past decade, the number of complaints filed by men has more than tripled in recent years. Joining me to discuss specific ways to handle unsolicited behavior, whether a male or female is being harassed, is Bruce Atkins of Deutsch Atkins PC, an employee rights law firm here in New Jersey. Bruce, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Walt.
I guess in a weird sort of way, it's a sign of equality that you're starting to see more men filing these complaints.
It's a sign of equality. It's also a sign of the fact that gay is more accepted than it was 10, 15 years ago. So men who are gay in the workplace feel more emboldened to do whatever they do in soliciting people as well. So I think it happens more in that vein than it did historically.
What exactly, from a legal perspective, constitutes sexual harassment? Obviously, it's one of those things where I think people know it when they see it or hear it, but from a legal perspective, what is it?
Unwelcome advances, and that's the key word, is unwelcome. You can't ask for it and then say it was unwelcome. And I don't mean ask for it in the sense that one might in the street. I mean, if you encourage, if you participate, if you consider it to be welcome and a part of the workplace environment, it is not unwelcome.
So if you're making the jokes and then somebody makes another joke, that type of situation,
exactly.
It's difficult to then say you were offended.
It's exactly. If you joke and you're part of the joke and you're sending emails and receiving emails and participating in the banter back and forth, that would not necessarily be unwelcome. However, if it gets to a point where someone says, okay, enough, stop, that's where it turns from welcome to unwelcome. And if it continues past that point, arguably it could become unwelcome.
If you feel like you're being exposed to some sort of unwelcome advance, what are the steps you take? The first step, I would assume, being to say stop.
Of course, you have to let the actor know that it is unwelcome and that you don't want it to occur to you anymore. Second step would be in the context of a company circumstance would be to report it to superiors, HR, the steps that are supposed to be in place with each company concerning an anti-sexual harassment policy. So you want to follow the steps delineated in your particular company.
No, there have been certainly a lot of high-profile cases recently. The obvious one that jumps out is Herman Cain. A lot of talk about sexual harassment on the campaign trail, and ultimately, one would think that ultimately is what cost him his run for the White House. Is this type of behavior commonplace and not talked about? Because it seemed like people were coming out of the woodwork in the Cain case.
Well, what happens is in a number of these circumstances, and I certainly don't have all the details on Mr. Cain, so I'm not going to speak to that particularly.
I wouldn't ask you to do that.
But in terms of what happens in the workplace as a general rule, if someone complains and it ultimately results in either a settlement or a resolution of a lawsuit, very often the companies require it to be confidential, and therefore it doesn't leak out to the press or become widely known. Of course, Mr. Cain 15 years ago or 10 years ago or 9 years ago was not famous.
Right.
And therefore,
when you become a public figure, it seems like it changes everything.
Exactly. So when now he becomes a public figure, these people come out of the woodwork and say, hey, wait a minute, this happened to me with this guy. That's generally speaking what happens. But it's been, and I think there was reported in the news that a number of these settlements were confidential and were settled by the company that he worked for,
right,
and just kept quiet. And that happens almost all the time, my experience.
So if you're in that situation where you're being exposed to an unwelcome advance, you've made the complaint, you've told the actor to stop, what type of evidence do you need to gather?
Well, that's always the hard part. And the hard part is and I'm sure we've all heard this expression, it becomes a he said, she said, or a he said, or a she said, he said. And consequently, unless there's corroborative evidence, it becomes a very difficult road to hoe, because ultimately it's who's more believable and what happens.
So if you have any witnesses, obviously you do that, and keep a journal. I know some have said as well. Bruce Atkins, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bruce Atkins with the law firm Deutsch Atkins PC. Stay with us. Kane in Your Corner will be right back. We'll have this week's Consumer Alert as well as something a little bit different, an interview with a surviving Tuskegee Airman in Ocean County.